If the Metroid series has succeeded in one thing, it is consistently being able to satisfy the desire to explore alien worlds. Despite Samus's adventure catalogue only containing 8 main entries in 35 years, each of those journeys are fraught with foes and morphball tunnels. The original 1986 release featured many of the aspects that would not only define the series, but also a massively popular subgenre of games that spawned from Metroid's initial genius. Metroid on the NES features a gigantic world brimming with secrets to find and enemies to defeat. Getting lost on Zebes and desperately clawing her way out is Samus's specialty, and with all of the treasures hidden within its depths, Samus will make her way into the dark corners that no other dares to venture. Her exploits have earned Samus a lasting legacy, and Nintendo continually seeks to honor that legacy with the newer releases. Mostly. Metroid's common pairing with the Castlevania series is no accident. Both series began on the NES, and have regularly featured wide worlds filled with prizes for the player to collect. The true difference is that Metroid featured the exploration gameplay in the series' first entry, even before the programming revolution that allowed developers to do a lot more with the NES hardware than was thought possible at Metroid's development. Metroid doesn't feature colourful backgrounds or a variety of animated sprites. Instead, Metroid's scale is the defining factor. Zebes features 7 distinct regions, 3 bosses, and a dizzying breadth of wildlife. No other game at the time had anywhere near as much to see, and this world wants Samus dead, long before she encounters Mother Brain. Similarly notable titles from around 1986 lacked the variety Metroid boasted in terms of both tileset and enemies. Super Mario Bros. Is undoubtedly a legendary title, but the total number of enemy types and Mario's own gameplay capability are far exceeded by the vast numbers Metroid offers. 8-bit computing relied a lot on ingenious artistry, as well as masterful space designation within the NES cartridge's tiny storage capacity in order to look appealing. As far as modern standards go, NES games aren't looking so great. Later in the console's library, programmers became especially capable at cramming games onto the NES cartridges for more intricate backgrounds and visual effects. Metroid predates these techniques, so the game has entirely black backgrounds, and the tilesets are rather limited. This surprisingly leads to a deep sense of claustrophobia and déjà vu, as many rooms that use the same tilesets also have suspiciously similar layouts. This dark, foreign world is filled with small creatures that attack Samus, but she is incapable of hitting them. She might be knocked into a pit of acid and begin desperately, frantically trying to climb back out as her health slowly ticks down. Some of the floor tiles are fakes. Sometimes progress is hidden behind a room that looks like it has no exits. The limited visuals make the game more unnerving. Samus's walking animation is goofy looking though, and the variable end scene where she removes more of her suit if the player completed the game faster is tasteless, so the visual problems aren't all two-sided. But considering just how technically limited Nintendo was at this point, this game delivers atmosphere in fantastic density. At the outset, Samus isn't particularly dangerous, nor is she capable of sustaining much damage. Her arm cannon deals little damage and doesn't even reach the edge of the screen, while her maximum health sits at a measly 99. She's also massively inflexible, being incapable of bending down to fit into small gaps or aiming at lower heights. Fortunately, immediately to the left is the Morph Ball upgrade. This allows Samus to halve her height and roll through holes in the walls. The Morph Ball is later upgraded to be able to drop bombs to blow open parts of the floor and walls, as well as damage enemies that were too short to hit with the arm cannon. Samus can aim directly upward, which is especially valuable considering how many critters can fly above. And there is a generous amount of hit stun that inflicts the enemies when shot, to allow the player to reposition if necessary. Samus's jump gains good height, but her air control is lacking. It is possible to redirect Samus as she flies through the air, but jumping large distances never feels comfortable, even with the high jump boots. Luckily, there aren't many instances where the player must jump across a large gap, as a lot of traversal is vertically focused. Other upgrades include the Varia suit, which reduces incoming damage, as well as arm cannon upgrades that increase its range and damage. The iconic Ice Beam is also present, which freezes enemies and can turn them into platforms. There are many missile packs and energy tanks similarly hidden throughout the world to increase Samus's offensive options and survivability. Bosses, or the titular Metroids, can only be defeated when using missiles, so the player should ideally collect a large supply of these. The Ice Beam is also mandatory throughout the final area of the game, so the player should be wary of finding it before entering Mother Brain's lair. Zebes is a huge place. There are 7 regions that each feature their own range of biodiversity, as well as natural hazards for Samus to contend with. The first few areas are relatively relaxed, and act more as pathways to the more dangerous regions. These mid and late game areas are accessed by elevators that act as respawn points when the player inevitably dies. Tile sets between regions provide clear distinction beyond the tile's colors. Cold, rocky regions give way to a more sandy color that later becomes a toxic purple color, populated with a bubbly biological texture. The tone changes throughout the world, and creates an excellent sense of scale. However, the world lacks a notion of place. A lot of the rooms are either the same layout, or they're so visually similar that I found myself lost without any landmarks. Navigating this world without taking notes or drawing a map would take card-counting memorization skills. It all fits together logically, but if the player hasn't yet formed a vision of Zebes, then it can be difficult to understand where they are. It's confusing, but incredible given it's a first of its kind. The NES isn't renowned for having the most complex capabilities for enemies, and Metroid's world scale likely caused this area to suffer somewhat. There are a couple of varieties of wall clinger enemies that patrol many of the platforms throughout the world. They're standard enemies. There are some flying insect creatures that are always difficult to deal with, as they dart around and can fly below the arm cannon's shooting height. Later in the game, these look like they've grown armor. They're a strong puzzle enemy that rewards aggression. Insect nests that infinitely spawn fast bugs are also common and ideal farming locations, but they can turn a platforming challenge into a much more dangerous encounter. These critters will become the player's good friends, but they aren't especially interesting to fight. There are dive bombers and bouncers that serve similar functions. Just shoot them before they get too close. Also quite standard. The seahorses that shoot fire are horrible for the performance though. Just one of these enemies and one other enemy can cause some severe slowdown, and they aren't used in ways that are as interesting as the nests. The sphere enemies and the gliders aren't very exciting either. The patrolling beetles that are often set up for the player to use as platforms aren't really enemies. Even the Metroids themselves aren't very exciting. They can get stuck on terrain, which makes them significantly less menacing too. Processing power is of course the limiting factor here, and to make any of these enemies have more substantial attack strategies would likely have cost vital space. There are some redundant areas in the world though. Places where there isn't anything to find, or they don't lead to anywhere the player couldn't get to another way. I won't be advocating for the removal of these, since they offer a dead end while exploring, but if there were a way to increase the enemy capability, I would have liked that. This low capability also extends to the bosses. Kraid, Ridley, and Mother Brain all have different methods of attack, but they aren't really participants in the fights. Clearly the attacks are coming from Kraid and Ridley sprites, but I get the impression that they'd be doing this even if Samus wasn't in the room. Ridley fires waves of fireballs across the platform. If the player tries to fight Ridley from afar, they'll find that the fireballs block projectiles, and that getting hit by them really hurts. Standing right beside Ridley yields an easy victory, and just looking at the way the fireballs moves makes this idea very obvious. Kraid relentlessly fires an arcing projectile and needles from the front. The projectiles all beat Samus's, so Kraid is essentially immune to damage half of the time. The relentlessness of Kraid's attack combined with Samus's limited movement makes tanking the damage the most effective strategy for the player. With both defeated, the player may advance to take on Mother Brain. This battle is chaos. There are turrets that prevent the player from standing atop the platforms for too long, circular attacks that prevent the player from standing in any one place for too long, floor hazards, and barriers that must be destroyed quickly else they regain their health in the downtime. It's a defense check. Avoiding taking damage in here would be a massively impressive feat. It's fun though, significantly better than the other two fights, and the iconic escape sequence pushes it into one of the most memorable moments on the NES. True to its contemporaries, Metroid is difficult, but it is also absurdly tedious. Enemies move fast and hit hard. Shooting them isn't especially easy either, so taking a lot of damage is very likely. Upon reviving, the player is spawned at the nearest designated spawn location with 30 health, even if the player has 8 energy tanks. So the player has to farm enemies in order to collect health drops, to go from 30 to full. At endgame, this takes at least 10 minutes of farming bug nests. 10 minutes of killing the same 2 enemies over and over. Why not just respawn at full health? Passwords similarly don't spawn Samus at full health, so at least there's a really good incentive to not die. A 10+ minute run back to a boss is a little ridiculous though. I managed to finish the game in the 6 to 10 hour range, but a large quantity of that time was spent farming health drops and missiles. Metroid has aged rather uncomfortably, but not catastrophically. It's all here. Explore the world, battle the enemies, find upgrades, and climb up the escape route. Metroid's first entry laid the groundwork for one of Nintendo's flagship franchises, as well as introduced the world to one of the video game's most iconic and admired female characters. Metroid might not be the most fun game to play nowadays, but its legacy will be forever felt throughout the existence of video games. Next time, I'll be playing Steam's best bargain bin game. It's great.